The voice on the phone was the kind you use for bad news, professionally kind, wrapped in a thin layer of pity. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her tone smooth and practiced, "we're just calling to confirm the cancellation of your procedure for this Friday." I was standing in my kitchen, the one Robert and I had painted a sunny yellow 30 years ago. The afternoon light spilled across the worn linoleum floor, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. In my hand, I held a list of pre-operative instructions from Emory University Hospital, the paper crisp and official. My world, which had felt so solidly under my feet just a moment before, suddenly tilted on its axis. I must have been silent for too long because the woman's voice softened. "Ma'am, are you there?" I cleared my throat. "There must be a mistake. I haven't canceled anything." There was a pause, the soft click of a keyboard. "My notes here say the cancellation was requested yesterday by Mr. Michael Vance under the durable power of attorney. He spoke with our billing department." Michael, my son, the polished financial consultant from Charlotte, the one who handled everything. The administrator, trying to be helpful, read from her screen. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion as she quoted him. "The reason cited by your son was an unforeseen financial reallocation." The words hung in the quiet of my kitchen, sterile and foreign. A financial reallocation? That's what he called erasing my future? The list of pre-op instructions was still clutched in my hand when I saw the picture later that evening. The house felt too big, the silence too loud. I'd been numbly scrolling on my tablet, the blue light of the screen a cold comfort in the encroaching dark. And then, there it was, a public post from my daughter-in-law, Catherine. The photo was painfully bright. Michael, Catherine, and my two beautiful grandchildren, beaming, their faces tilted towards the Miami sun. Behind them, the colossal white hull of a Royal Caribbean cruise ship dominated the frame. Catherine's caption was a little burst of synthetic joy. "Surprise, European getaway. Michael is the best. Hashtag making memories." The contrast was a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. My life-altering mitral valve repair, the one my cardiologist said would give me back my breath and my energy, had been traded for their 2-week luxury vacation. They were making memories while my own future was being systematically dismantled. The house, my home for 42 years, suddenly felt like a tomb. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall echoed the emptiness. Just as I was about to turn the tablet off, a new email pinged. The sender was an automated address from the financial services firm Michael used. Subject, transaction confirmation, hashtag 78B42. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a number and a cost that was chillingly precisely the amount set aside for my surgery. I wasn't looking for a fight the next morning. I was in the attic looking for 40 years of my own history, stored in a dusty banker's box. The fog of shock had burned away overnight, leaving behind a cold, clear anger that settled deep in my bones. I didn't call Michael. What was there to say? Instead, I climbed the pull-down stairs to the attic, the air thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten things. I found the box I was looking for, labeled Financials 75 to 95, and pulled it down. But beneath it was another, newer box, unmarked. Inside, I found a folder Michael had given me last year when he'd flown down to get my affairs in order. It contained 3 things. First, a crisp copy of the new power of attorney I had signed in his pristine Charlotte office. Second, a recent bank statement showing the large withdrawal he'd made to create the so-called surgery fund. And third, a single sheet of paper, a to-do list he must have printed and left behind by accident. It was a list of his tasks related to my care. My eyes scanned his neat, precise printing. One line item jumped out. "Finalize Mom's post-op care plan." A neat, single line was drawn through it. In the margin next to the strike-through, in his own familiar handwriting, was a new note. No longer necessary. Reallocate funds to Project Legacy. Project Legacy. It sounded so grand, so important. I was beginning to understand that his legacy and my life were two very different projects. She read my son's handwritten note without a word, her expression unreadable. Imani Washington was younger than most of my former students, but her silence had the weight of a judge. I sat across from her in the small, tidy office of a legal aid service for seniors, a place that smelled of coffee and paper. I had found their number online, a quiet beacon in my sea of confusion. I laid it all out for her. The phone call from the hospital, the vacation photo, the note about Project Legacy. I expected questions, perhaps even a hint of doubt. Instead, she just listened, her dark eyes focused on mine. When I finished, she gave a single, decisive nod. "He used your trust to build a lie," she said, her voice calm and even. "The first thing we do is stop him from doing any more damage." She didn't suggest calling him or appealing to his conscience. Her approach was as methodical as my own. She drafted a plan right there on a yellow legal pad. Step 1 was to file for an emergency injunction to freeze every account he had access to. Step 2 was to bring in a specialist. "I work with a forensic accountant," she explained, "a man named Mr. Davis. He finds stories in numbers." Then she looked at me, her gaze direct. "And we'll need a sworn affidavit from a third party, someone who can testify to your health and state of mind before all this. I have a name in mind, your cardiologist." The cardiologist's nurse remembered the call perfectly. We had her on speakerphone in Imani's office, her cheerful voice filling the small space. "Oh yes, your son was so charming," she said, "so concerned. He explained that you'd had a change of heart, that you wanted to pursue alternative therapies and wouldn't be needing the surgery after all." The politeness of it all was what made my blood run cold. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a carefully constructed narrative, delivered with a smile. He had canceled not just the procedure, but every pre-op appointment and follow-up consultation, dismantling my entire network of care with a few pleasant phone calls. Imani let the nurse finish, then asked a simple question. Was there anything unusual about the call? Anything at all? The nurse paused for a moment. "Well, it was odd, though," she finally added, her voice dropping slightly. "About an hour before he called to cancel everything, he requested a complete copy of your cardiac assessment and most recent medical history be faxed to his office. He said he wanted it for his records for the new care team. I still have the fax confirmation slip right here, dated, timed." Imani and I looked at each other. He didn't just want to stop my care, he wanted the official record of why I needed it in the first place. "This isn't just theft," the accountant said, his voice a low murmur. His finger traced a glowing blue line on the spreadsheet projected onto his office wall. "This is architecture." Mr. Davies was a small, quiet man who wore tweed jackets and seemed more like a librarian than a financial detective. We were in his office, a room filled with screens and the soft hum of computers. He, Imani, and I watched as he laid out the structure of my son's deceit. It was more extensive than I could have imagined. Michael hadn't just taken the surgery money. For months, he had been systematically liquidating my smaller retirement assets, a few stocks here, a small mutual fund there. He had routed the money through a series of newly created accounts with names designed to look legitimate. E. Vance Home Repair, Decatur Property Maintenance. It was a false paper trail of phantom expenses, designed to bleed me dry slowly, quietly. Then Mr. Davies clicked open a buried folder of emails he had recovered from Michael's cloud storage. "The vacation wasn't the plan. It was the alibi," he said softly. "While he was out of the country and unreachable, he had things set in motion. He pointed to an email sent to a realtor in Decatur. The subject line read, "Expedited cash sale." The attachment wasn't a repair invoice. It was a fully executed listing agreement for my house. My home. I found it where Robert and I kept everything that mattered, in the old metal firebox tucked behind a stack of tax receipts from the 80s. It was as if our values were just another line item to be reconciled at the end of the year. After the meeting with Mr. Davies, I had come home with a desperate need to hold something real, something that hadn't been twisted by my son's ambition. I was searching for the original power of attorney document Robert and I had drafted with our lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, years ago. I found it, the paper softened with age. I read the words we had so carefully chosen. The language was protective, specific, stipulating that any action taken on my behalf must be for my direct care, comfort, and well-being. It was a document built on love, a testament to a 45-year partnership. It was designed to protect me, not to empower a predator. And then I saw it. Clipped to the back of the old document was a small yellow sticky note, a ghost from last year's visit. Michael's familiar, perfect handwriting filled the small square. "Mom," it read, "this old one is too restrictive for legacy planning. The new one I drafted gives us more flexibility. Let's get it signed when you're in Charlotte." Flexibility. The word felt like a splinter in my mind. The flexibility to sell my home out from under me, the flexibility to cancel my surgery, the flexibility to erase me. Granted. I was sitting on my front porch, watching the late afternoon traffic move down the street. I didn't cheer or cry out. I just sat there in the old wicker chair Robert had loved and took the first full, deep breath I'd had in a week. The emergency injunction was in place. The accounts were frozen. For the moment, the bleeding had stopped. The relief was immense, but it was a quiet, fragile thing. I felt a small measure of control return, a sense that my own history was not yet finished being written. Later that day, the mail arrived. Bills, junk mail, and a thick, cream-colored envelope with elegant calligraphy. I slid it open with my thumb. It was an invitation to a charity gala in Charlotte, hosted by a prominent community foundation. My breath caught in my throat. The event was honoring my son, Michael Vance, as Philanthropist of the Year for his exemplary work in legacy planning and generational wealth. My name was right there on the program, printed in a flowing script beneath his. It was listed under the heading, "With gratitude to his inspiration, Mrs. Eleanor Vance." He wasn't just stealing my money, he was stealing my name, using me as a prop in the grand theater of his own benevolence. They had a slideshow of family memories. There I was on a screen 10 feet high, smiling in a photo from 5 years ago at my grandson's birthday party. The caption projected beneath it read, "Giving my son the freedom to lead." Imani and I sat at a small table near the back of the grand ballroom, two quiet observers in a sea of champagne and polite applause. We were both dressed impeccably, two women on a mission of intelligence gathering. The entire evening was a masterclass in manipulation. One by one, Michael's colleagues and friends approached our table, their faces etched with sincere concern. They offered sympathies for my recent health struggles and told me how wonderful it was that Michael was taking the burden off my shoulders. They were all unknowingly reciting the script he had written for them, revealing the depth of his calculated deceptions. Then came his acceptance speech. He stood at the podium, tanned and confident, the picture of a devoted son. "It is our solemn duty," he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "to make the hard decisions for those we love, to protect their legacy even when they can't protect it themselves." Beside me, Imani went still. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She leaned over and showed me an image, a screenshot of the application the accountant had found. The application to have me declared medically incompetent and moved to a state-run facility in rural South Carolina. The language was an almost verbatim match. "He was in a hurry." The young woman's voice was nervous, a little shaky over the phone. He told my boss the owner was medically incapacitated and he needed a cash offer before he returned from Europe. Imani had gotten a call from a junior assistant at the realty firm Michael had contacted. The young woman's conscience had been nagging at her. The aggressive timeline, the story about a frail, incapacitated mother, it hadn't sat right with her. She had seen the injunction notice and put the pieces together. Now she was agreeing to provide a sworn affidavit detailing Michael's instructions. She emailed Imani a copy of the listing agreement he had signed electronically. Imani opened the file on her laptop as we sat in her office, the young woman still on the phone. "Eleanor, look at this," Imani said, her voice tight with focus. She pointed to the signature line. "The signature is dated for the day your surgery was supposed to happen. He was creating a false timeline, making it look like he acted after you were already out of commission." She clicked on the document's properties, revealing its digital history. Her finger tapped the screen. But the email's metadata tells the real story. He sent this file from the Miami cruise terminal 2 days before your surgery was even canceled. The letter from his lawyer was 5 pages of condescending concern. It spoke of my obviously confused state and my unfortunate lapse in judgment, all couched in careful legal terminology. It was a thinly veiled threat, demanding we drop the baseless and defamatory action before I caused irreparable harm to my family's good name. I read it and felt a fresh wave of cold anger. He was trying to gaslight a judge. Our rebuttal, drafted by Imani, was 2 pages of time-stamped facts. It was a masterpiece of quiet devastation. She didn't waste a word on emotion or accusation. She simply laid out the sequence of events in a clear, irrefutable timeline. She attached a concise summary of our evidence: the bank transfers, the cruise ticket purchase confirmation, the listing agreement with its damning metadata, the application to the care facility, and the sworn affidavit from my cardiologist. There were no threats, only evidence. Michael's lawyer called back within an hour of receiving our response. The aggressive, patronizing tone was gone, replaced by a strained formality. He requested an emergency hearing in probate court to resolve this family misunderstanding as quickly and quietly as possible. Imani agreed without hesitation. After she hung up, she looked at me. "He called it a mediation," she said, a small, determined smile on her face. "I call it a reckoning." My son walked into the sterile probate courtroom tanned and confident. He looked over at me and smiled, a sad, performative smile, the kind you give a confused child you have to protect from herself. His lawyer, a man with silver hair and an expensive suit, began to speak in a low, somber tone about a son's difficult duty and the painful choices love sometimes requires. He was painting a portrait of Michael as a hero, a man shouldering an unbearable burden for his mother's own good. After a few minutes, Imani stood up. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "with the court's permission, I have a brief presentation that might clarify the timeline of Mr. Vance's decisions." The judge nodded. On a large screen that had been set up, Imani projected the evidence, piece by piece. First, Catherine's joyful cruise photo, time-stamped. Next to it, Michael's email to the realtor, sent from the Miami cruise terminal just hours earlier. She showed the transfer of my surgery funds next to the purchase of the European cruise package. The application to the state-run facility in South Carolina appeared next to a photo of Michael accepting his Philanthropist of the Year award. The room was utterly silent. Michael's face, which had been a mask of concerned sincerity, slowly went ashen. The judge stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked directly at my son and said, "Mr. Vance, I strongly suggest you and your counsel take a 5-minute recess. The district attorney's office has a very capable elder fraud unit that may be interested in this presentation." There was no apology, just his lawyer, pale and visibly shaken, sliding a thick stack of revocation documents across the polished conference room table.
The reckoning had been swift and silent. To avoid the judge making good on his suggestion about the district attorney, Michael had agreed to everything. We were in a small, windowless room at the courthouse. He sat opposite me, staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. His empire, so carefully built with spreadsheets and persuasion, was being dismantled with the quiet stroke of a pen. He signed the revocation of the durable power of attorney. He signed documents authorizing the immediate wire transfer of every last cent he had taken. He signed a release, relinquishing any and all future claims to my estate. He didn't say a word through the entire process, just the scratch of his pen on paper. As he stood to leave, he finally looked at me. His eyes were not remorseful. They were cold, clear, and filled with a strange kind of resentment, as if I were the one who had wronged him. "I was trying to build something," he said, his voice low and flat. It wasn't an excuse or a plea for forgiveness. It was an explanation from a world I no longer recognized, a world where a mother's life was just raw material for a son's project legacy. The first check I wrote from my own bank account again wasn't for a bill or a copay. It was a donation to the people who had given me my voice back. 6 months had passed. The Georgia autumn had settled in, painting the leaves outside my window in shades of gold and crimson. My heart surgery had been rescheduled and was a complete success. I could walk up the stairs without my breath catching in my chest. I could work in my garden again. I was sitting in Imani's office, not as a client, but as a benefactor. On the table between us were the final documents to establish the Robert Vance Senior Justice Fund, a trust in my late husband's name dedicated to providing free legal and financial forensic services for elderly people facing exploitation. I was taking the painful evidence of my own ordeal, the emails, the bank statements, the lies, and archiving it as a shield for others. I signed the last page, the ink a dark, definitive line. Imani smiled and handed me a final folder. Tucked inside was a handwritten card she'd been saving for me. It was from the realtor's young assistant, the witness who had helped us secure our timeline. Her neat script filled the small card. It read, "My own grandmother went through something similar, but she didn't have anyone to help her. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to fight back." The afternoon sun felt different now, not just warm, but earned. I was sitting on my front porch, in my favorite wicker chair, the one with the faded floral cushions. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the big oak tree in the front yard. The house, this sturdy brick home that held every important memory of my life, was unequivocally mine. In my hand, I held a small, smooth riverstone I'd picked up from my garden that morning. It was cool and solid, a simple talisman of a quiet fight. There had been no public celebration of my victory, no dramatic confrontation with Michael since that day in the courthouse. There was only this, the profound piece of a history that was almost erased, now fully reclaimed and my own again. I was not a victim. I was the historian of my own life once more, the keeper of my own records. I looked out at the familiar street, at the open sky, and felt the cool air fill my lungs. My story was finally written in a hand that would not be erased.